Our state policy action plan is guided by these 4 principles. To achieve an equitable recovery, we believe states must ensure all policy measures are designed intentionally to drive upward mobility, close equity gaps, build on what works, and integrate and coordinate systems. So what policy actions should states take? At JFF, we believe states must focus on the needs of people and communities that have been historically underserved and left out of opportunity. Policy should be designed to equip individuals with the knowledge, tools, and experiences they need to achieve an economic advancement. And in the roadmap, we've laid out 4 key strategies for doing that. There should be a focus on skill building and credential attainment strategies, career navigation and exploration, innovative financing approaches to help people pay and afford education training, and efforts to strengthen financial and social supports. In the roadmap, we highlight a number of states and state policies that exemplify the strategies that we put forward in the roadmap, and here are just a few listed down below from Michigan, Colorado, Virginia, and Arkansas. The second pillar of the roadmap, we believe states must focus on inequities that put a strain on the health and competitiveness of regional areas. Policy should be designed to invest in quality jobs and broaden access to them. Engage employers in the design and delivery of talent development solutions to address pressing skill demands and business growth opportunities, and to empower the community to play a role in charting a course for economic development. In the roadmap, we lay out 4 key strategies and policy considerations in this area. That includes taking inclusive approaches to economic development strategies, encouraging employers to expand the availability of quality jobs, investing in regional sector strategies, and making job-generating investments in infrastructure and in small businesses. And in the roadmap, we call attention to efforts both at a local and state level that are revitalizing regional economies. And that includes in Baltimore, Austin, Texas, California, and in Colorado. And the third pillar of the roadmap is we believe states must make education workforce systems more relevant and responsive to the needs of workers, learners, and businesses. Policy should be designed to scale and sustain what works, spur innovation, dismantle inequitable and arcane structures, and foster collective action. We call out and encourage 3 strategies in this area for redesigning systems. That includes accelerating, investing, developing, accelerating and efficient pathways, implementing skills and competency-based approaches to education, and integrating work and learning in program models. And in the roadmap, we feature a number of state efforts. Among them include efforts in Illinois through their POWER Act and through CBE, competency-based education efforts, in Kansas, and in Washington's work-based learning effort. JFF has produced policy briefs digging into each of the 11 strategy areas of the roadmap. I would welcome you to go to jff.org/state roadmap to access these briefs. Here are 3 that represent key aspects of Pathways to Prosperity Network, career navigation, pathways, and work-based learning. Recognizing that each state is in a different starting point, JFF has intentionally designed the roadmap along a continuum of policy options. I've highlighted here various policy levers we encourage states to pursue in implementing and scaling the strategies in the roadmap. They cover the gamut of kind of foundational planning, goal setting steps, to advanced efforts. We're projecting new resources and scaling best practices and transformational efforts. And we'll drill into some of that more today. Finally, just again, encourage you to go to the website to learn more about the strategies, examples, and recommendations in the roadmap. Without further ado, it is my great honor to introduce to you three of my brilliant colleagues who are experts in the aspects of the state policy roadmap we are going to now delve into. Nate Anderson manages several bodies of work concentrating on credentialing, labor market information technologies, competency-based education, and the future of work. Ethan Pollack leads JFF's Financing the Future initiative, which seeks to reimagine the way education skills development investments are financed. And Allison Schmidt is one of the driving forces behind JFF's place-based approach to regional economic development, as exemplified by efforts underway in California. In a moment, I will invite each of them to share their insights on why legacy approaches to education, skills, and economic development are not well suited to realizing the goals of an equitable economic recovery, and what JFF believes needs to be done to transform these systems, and what we are doing to affect this change. Nate will focus on skills-based education, Ethan on innovative financing models, and Allison on inclusive approaches to economic development. I'll follow up with their presentations with state policy considerations as described in the state policy roadmap. But before we get to their presentations, I've asked them to share a few words about the importance of equity in the work that they do. So if you would like to take yourself off mute and join the conversation, I'll invite Allison to share what does an equitable recovery mean to you personally and in the work that you do at JFF.
Yeah, thanks, Dave, and hi, everyone. First, I'll just say that I'm seeing an incredible amount of opportunity right now because so many people are talking about the need to build back better and recover stronger. So it's not just a select few of us anymore shouting from the rooftops about future work trends that are transforming our economy and poised to exacerbate inequality. It's like the crisis is in front of us and everyone can see that. And so for me and for many of the partners I work with in California that are trying to do economic development differently, equitable recovery is about focusing on things like job quality, making sure the businesses we invest in are creating quality jobs and that reskilling efforts are trying to put people in those quality jobs. And it's about focusing on racial equity and climate resilience, not as separate issues, but as integral to recovery, giving capital to Black and brown entrepreneurs and including historically disadvantaged communities in the process of developing and implementing recovery strategies. So I'm personally excited right now because I'm seeing the opportunity to test some of the approaches we've been prototyping in regions across the state. So that's all I'll say right now. That's great. Thanks, Allison. Nate, I'll turn to you. How does equity factor into the work that you do?
Great. Thanks, David. I can't agree more with Allison. I do think that there is a dynamic shift happening in the way that people talk about labor markets, talk about job opportunity, talk about careers, not jobs. And I think, in the spirit of never wasting a good crisis, I think COVID has very much pushed people to have some of the hard conversations that they weren't willing to have before. So one area that I'm particularly interested in seeing increased conversation around, and which I think is largely historically unaddressed, is the issue that in the 2008 recession, one of the impacts of that recession was that we saw an increase in the number of long-term unemployed individuals, especially working-age men, who dropped out of the labor market entirely. In fact, we had the lowest labor market participation rate in 40 years at the peak of the recovery. That's what we were looking at from 2008. The silver lining was that women were in the labor market to an even greater degree in that period than ever before. And then COVID hit. And one of the legacies, at least short-term legacies there, is that we now have more long-term unemployed women as a result of that, more so than we had when we have long-term unemployed men. So there's this huge group of people that otherwise could be in the labor market who aren't. They've stopped out. And I think that people are beginning to acknowledge that and think about strategies for creating opportunity for those individuals to get back to work, to go to where they're at and acknowledge the issues that they're facing, and create access points that are customized to their communities and their realities. So one aspect of an equitable recovery here for me is really very much focused on this idea of long-term unemployed and how do we create success and new employment opportunities for that group.
Yeah, absolutely. And Ethan, love for you to join the conversation. What does it look like? How does equity factor in?
Sure. I think that the conversation around equity, moving it from I think that, if you look 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, equity was kind of an afterthought. It was something that was in the conversation. But what really mattered, especially for the policy conversation, was economic growth. It was market efficiency. I pulled off the shelf this book from graduate school, The Microeconomics of Public Policy. There's very little about equity in this book. It's all about graphs, being able to show how we can kind of make the market more efficient and maximize the amount of utility and efficiency in society. And there's no, in no way is there kind of this question about how do we relate to each other about kind of inequality trends, both economic inequality and also racial and gender inequality, because those are things that for so long in our conversation around economics, around policy, and I think even around workforce development, we're really missing. And so, I've seen this conversation evolve, definitely over the last 5 years, where this recognition, not just that we need to talk more about equity, but that equity actually may be one of those things that we actually need to be maximizing. It's not just something that we are trying to make sure that we don't exacerbate, but actually is a goal in and of itself. And I see this in particular in my work. Innovative finance is, as you can guess, related to the world of finance. And these are oftentimes financial instruments. And the financial industry doesn't have a great track record on in particular racial equity and racial justice. The financial system is oftentimes designed to lend money to people who already have money or show a good track record. And of course, that means that you're going to be just reinforcing a lot of the historical discrimination, and disadvantages, that in privileges that have been in society for decades. So I think that innovative finance, looking at it through a fresh lens, not just how do we make sure that we are providing more access to education and to credit, but actually that equity being kind of a chief goal there is something that I think is a relatively new conversation. So I'm glad that the conversation around innovative finance is emerging around the same time, that there's this real understanding that equity is not just a factor to consider or something that we're trying to not exacerbate, but a goal that we're trying to achieve.
Could agree more. That's excellent. Thanks, Ethan. Well, without further ado, I wanted to go to our first presentation by Nate about the need for a skill-based approach to education, which is one of the 3 key strategies in the systems redesign pillar of the state policy roadmap. I'll turn to you now, Nate.
Great. Thank you. So let's talk about current state. So the kind of, in David, in your words, the legacy system that exists today. So what's the challenge with the current education and work alignment system that exists nationwide? First of all, the way we measure advancement and skill attainment and credential attainment, the sort of readiness for work qualities that we look for out of an educational system, typically is measured more in time spent. So how many hours you've spent in a classroom, and did you meet the sort of basic requirements of that course or that program of study, ultimately sort of resulting in a degree that isn't necessarily aligned with the labor market. Most often, this sort of 4-year or 2-year degree, bachelor's, associate's degree, and that's historically how we've kind of measured progress. So that's a problem already. It's not really looking at learning; it's looking at time as a primary measurement. The second is when we think about how we inform the design of our programs, of our curriculum, of the things that we teach individuals who are looking for jobs. How confident are we that we actually know what employers want, and how much work have we done to be able to unearth the details there? And I think the answer is in many systems, historical systems, not a lot is done there beyond superficial conversations with local employers or fairly basic kind of labor market analysis. And which leads to the second problem, which is how do we know we're successful with those programs? Do we have a way to track what happens to students as they leave the educational wall, the walls of the institution, so to speak, and go out into employment? Do we have a way to say that, yes, they've been hired, yes, they got the wages they were promised and the job that they were promised, yes, they've advanced as we thought they would, or is the answer for the most part, we don't know, which I think is often the answer. And on top of that, the credential marketplace as it exists today. So it used to be even 10 years ago that we principally talked about degrees and certificates and certifications as the areas of credentials that were out there. In the last 20 plus years, but really in the last 10 years, there's been this explosion in credentials. And now we have over 1 million or almost 1 million unique credentials in the US that are out there, many of which are things like badges, which have really changed the dynamic around credentialing. So it's a more confusing, more chaotic marketplace for credentials that are out there. And that makes it hard for individuals, students who are earning these credentials, to figure out what has value and what doesn't. It makes it hard for employers to signal that they want certain credentials, to know that they can trust credentials. And it's made it for a very inefficient way to align education and employment. And then lastly, the current system, it exists 1 million proprietary or 1 million legacy data systems. It could be anything from the data that a college collects, or it could be the data that the state collects. The fact that the state data systems are different from each other, the fact that the workforce system is different from the education system, which is different from the adult ed system, et cetera, et cetera. There's 1 million different data platforms and data languages and data systems that are out there, and they don't link. So we can't do the longitudinal analysis that we need to be able to see more broadly what's happening to individuals. Next slide, please. So that's the current state. Where I think there is potential around some change happening is this concept of sort of skills-based education and work, the skills-based era. And I think this is where you're beginning to see a lot of early adopters of different approaches to what we call the skills-based sort of educational and work landscape. So first, there is this just general acceptance that skills are a common currency. So a way to think about how we construct jobs, how we construct credentials, how we construct educational programs. And once we get to the idea that that skills are the foundational elements of all these systems, you can begin to think about standardizing them so that you have a common language, a common currency. It's essentially that it becomes a common data infrastructure. And there's different ways to do that. It doesn't mean that everything's the same, but it does mean you have a way to link different data sets in that respect. And then you can begin to think about jobs, job advancement, careers, hiring as an extension of that data system, which essentially says that skills we can think about what skills have the most value in hiring practices, what skills have the most value in longitudinal returns. So how do you advance in your career? And then what's the relationship between skills, so that you could have your core set of skills that someone needs to get employment, and then you could have a set of supporting skills that are really important for getting better returns on what they have. And it just changes the dynamic. It's not anymore about degrees and degrees as the primary signal of employment readiness, which is still true today. But as we know, degrees are not often a very strong indicator that someone is ready for a particular job. And so we're starting to see new initiatives out there in the field, things like the T3 initiative, which is focused on what we call learner employment records, which we'll talk about in a second. But essentially, how do you kind of represent skills that an individual holds in a marketplace so that people can see them and use them to make decisions? The Job Data Exchange, the JDX, which is the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, is doing work around how do you change job descriptions to use standardized language so that when we do job postings, surveys and job posting scraping technologies, things like what Burning Glass uses. How do we use those technologies to how do we standardize the language within those job postings so that we can get a more clear and apples to apples comparable picture of the labor market? So I think that's becoming increasingly common, and that is also part of this sort of skills-based hiring world, what the Markle Foundation and others have invested in around how do you make decisions based on skills, not traditional credentials, and how does that allow you to get past some of the bias that's out there in the hiring practices that have historically existed. And so the last thing I'll say on this is another example, kind of skills-based area. You're beginning to see a lot of new players in this space, people who are building what they're offering. And when I say people, I mean mostly educational institutions and data providers that are building whole systems around skills, not just jobs. So it's things like boot camps, which are highly responsive to the labor market and typically turn around their programs faster than traditional, at least credit programs in the educational system. They often build their design processes around skills and verifying those skills with employers and looking for credentials that are based on those sort of standardized skill sets, things like certifications where you see national standards baked into credentials. Things like registries, where you actually are collecting a comparable set of skills data and allowing people to then use that data to do analyses or comparisons across different provisions, like Credential Engine is an example of a registry where they're collecting that. Skills platforms and portfolios, sort of the e-portfolio idea, like Parchment and others that are trying to figure out how to create a more dynamic resume. And that often incorporates a skills idea. Badging, Credly, companies like that are really creating a lot of skills-based analyses of the badges and credentials that are on their platforms and using that to bridge, to actually build pathways between different credentials so you can see where skills are the common denominator that allows you to potentially move forward. And then lastly, LMI providers, labor market information providers, companies like Burning Glass and IMSI, which are, IMSI, for example, has a 30,000 skill open source data set that you can link your own API to for free and use to do your own skills-based analyses that go beyond kind of jobs and credentials, the historical stuff there. Next slide. So one small aspect of this that I wanted to call out today that I think is sort of more on the kind of forward-facing, but an opportunity that we really want to explore, is this idea of digital skills wallets, or I mentioned earlier, the learner employment records, the LER idea, which is, can you create a sort of modern form of the resume, which is where you have a digital space that you can store a history of your skill, as a worker, as a learner, a digital history of your skills attainment that allows you to share, and you can share in different ways. So you can actually share different skills, different work history, different aspects of that wallet, depending on who you're talking to. So an employer might see something different from an educational system, which might see something different from, say, like a financial transaction. But can you do it in a couple specific ways? So one is, can the data within that be standardized? So is it actually comparable data within there? So one person's wallet can be compared to another person's wallet, so you can make decisions based on that standardized data. Is it verified, meaning that has the employer or the issuer of a credential been able to come in and give it a stamp that says, yes, this person has mastered the content that they claim they have mastered, and we're willing to verify that and stand by that. It deals with some of the trust issues that show up in labor markets and sort of hiring practices, especially where there's a million credentials, literally, that people have to choose from. And then dynamic. So it's updated regularly and in a way that reflects actual real-time learning and mastery of skills. So it's not a paper-based resume. It's a new way to think about it. And that's actually linked data. So it could be automatic that's happening. The individual can own it. So there's a lot of talk around blockchain-based skills wallets where the whole transaction history is both verified and cannot be changed or corrupted. So it's again sort of a trusted source of kind of skills history. And the individual, not the education provider, not the state, owns that data, and the individual can make choices about who sees it and who doesn't. And you won't have as many issues with unverified, with individuals sort of accessing that data who are buying access into it without the permission of the individual. And then the last thing I'll say is, so the exciting part is, I would encourage you all to think about from a policy standpoint, where are the opportunities to help create and support skills wallets for individuals in a way that could be scalable across an entire state. And it's a process to get there, but that's sort of the end goal. The challenges are that it's very new, these technologies. So the marketplace has a lot of players in it right now. There's a lot of different companies that are creating these skills wallets. And no one has emerged, I think, yet as a real leader in that space. So there's certainly some decision points around who you could potentially work with. They're new and they aren't fully adopted yet in the employer space or in the educational space. So you have to think about incentives for adoption and how you get there. User experience varies a great deal depending on how well designed that wallet is. And so there's going to be a lot of question marks, I think, still around what is the simplest but most effective way to present skills data in a way that is operational. People can act on it. And then lastly, there's some real policy concerns. One big one for me is this idea of self-sovereign data, so that if you own the data, does that still mean that you can sell the data? And does that introduce sort of predatory companies into that space who may be interested in buying that data for reasons that they aren't transparent about? So you need to think about a lot of policy issues around kind of, can you track what's done with that data? Is it transparent? And so on. So I would say that this is, to me, really stands out as one of those very promising areas, but very new areas that we need to be putting some energy into to think about how to build it right now as a way of thinking about getting full advantage of it in the future.
Thanks, Nate. Exciting. This is exactly the kind of conversation we wanted to have, kind of looking around the corner at innovative, transformational changes. And we touch on that in the state policy roadmap on, what's the role of states the role that states could play to really encourage and focus on skills in our education and work. And here's just a few that we lay out around data, around support for competency-based education and prior learning assessments. And I think getting to what you're talking about, Nate, this focus on supporting the development of passports and the role that states could do to support research and development, build sort of uniform data standards and support kind of some professional development there. So a lot to dig in there. In the interest of time, I am going to move us on to our second sort of mini presentation. This is focused on inclusive economic development, and I'm going to turn it over to Allison to walk us through this work and some strategies that JFF is undertaking.
Thanks, Dave. I think my slides are further down.
Oh, you know what? I got it out of order here. This is Ethan. I wasn't paying close enough attention. So yes. So appreciate the correction there. So actually we're talking to Ethan and we're talking about how we're going to finance people getting the kinds of education and training that is responsive to the labor market. How are they going to pay for that when affordability remains to be an issue?
Sure thing. I saw that slide and I was like, oh, wow, Allison did a slide that looks really similar to mine. So, we know that the coronavirus has, triggered a lot of permanent shifts in how and where people work. And, we know that that's going to be, create some particularly particular obstacles for young people and having kind of difficult understanding and kind of what skills they're going to need for a well-paying job and how to find kind of necessary education that's, both affordable and high quality. And, we also know that our existing post-secondary education system is not really up to the challenge. And, there's a large amount of things that, that JFF is doing in that regard, Nate, and Allison are working on some of those. But, we believe that financing can kind of be also, innovative financing can be part of the solution. So, what is, kind of the specific problem that we're trying to solve here? Education is really expensive. The traditional ways that students access credit for education leave behind too many students. Federal financial aid is inaccessible to 23 million individuals ages 25 and older without a high school diploma, 454,000 undocumented students, 45 million students who lack credit history, as well as a growing number of people who want to pursue accelerated programs. Consumers with poor credit or whose parents' income or credit history precludes them from co-signing a private loan or taking out a Parent Plus loan may also face obstacles in accessing credit to pay for education. If they do have access to credit, loan balances can stack up. Student loan debt for undergraduate education is roughly $750 billion. Outcomes also vary significantly by institution. Some schools and programs are highly effective, but others leave students worse off. And some programs and institutions, you hate to admit it, but some of them are actually just clearly predatory. These problems also reinforce racial and economic inequities. Students of color, first generation, and low-income students disproportionately face barriers to accessing education credit. And when they do, they're more likely to be the victim of poor quality and predatory schools. Next slide. So we believe that innovative finance has the potential to really benefit the system in a couple different ways. First, we believe it has the potential to promote affordability by spreading the cost and risk of paying for training across a variety of stakeholders rather than being entirely on the learner. Accountability by aligning the school's financial incentives with learners' employment and learning and earning outcomes. Promote access by offering credit to learners that are locked out of the existing financial system, including those with poor credit and whose parents' income or credit history precludes them from co-signing. And equity, because, as I mentioned earlier, students of color, first generation, and low-income students are disproportionately underserved and often harmed by a lack of affordability, accountability, and inaccessibility. Note that all of these are potential benefits of innovative finance. Whether each innovative finance approach actually accomplishes any or all of these goals depends on the specific design of the contract and the education program, as well as the regulatory environment in which they operate. The analogy that I oftentimes use is electricity. Electricity is very powerful. It is responsible for a massive amount, for the modern economy that we live in today, for a dramatic increase in living standards across the globe. It's also really dangerous. When you touch it, it can kill you. And so what we've done is we have not turned our back and said electricity is too dangerous, we can't use it. But instead, we've been very intentional about how to harness the power of electricity and make sure that it's done safely to the point where we can actually wire it into every single room across the country at so oftentimes at child level. And have very, very few injuries associated with it, because we've been very clear about here's what the danger is and making sure that we have kind of the best practices and guardrails in place to make sure that people are safe. Now, I've been talking about innovative finance, but I haven't really defined exactly what it is. So innovative finance is made up of two categories. Next slide. The first category is private financial instruments. These are instruments that are generally offered directly to students to finance their education. And then stakeholder models leverage contributions from government, impact investors, and employer contributions to student education and aligns incentives to those students. So I'll go through kind of a few of these. Income share agreements are one type of financial instrument where the student is going to be paying a share of their income over a set period of time. Once that set period of time ends, then the obligation ends. So if you think about it similarly to a loan, it is like a loan, except that instead of paying a dollar amount per month, you're paying a percentage of your income per month. And also, unlike a loan, where you eventually, you have to, repay it off with an ISA after a certain period of time, the obligation ends. So it has some similarities to income-based repayment at the federal level, in the sense that the income-based repayment can oftentimes be as a share of income, and also there's debt forgiveness at the end of a certain period of time. Deferred tuition models are similar, Oftentimes, though, instead of a share of income, you are paying a flat dollar amount. So you'll pay a certain dollar amount every single month. And then at the end of the time period, you're done. Both with ISAs and deferred tuition, they oftentimes also have income thresholds. So if the student does not make above a certain income threshold, then they don't need to pay anything that month. Income-based repayment, I think that's pretty similar to the federal system, but you see some of these models also in the private sector as well. Share of income and then there's oftentimes debt forgiveness at the end. Retail installment contracts, oftentimes you're paying a share of income per month, but there is no debt forgiveness at the end. That you continue paying a share of your income until you've repaid the principal. And then merit-based lending, and this actually brings up kind of a common thread throughout all 5 of these private financial instruments, which is that all of them are designed and priced on the basis of the outcomes of the programs that the students are enrolled in. So income share agreements, for example, are going to be designed for a specific program, or they're going to be priced for a specific program with the understanding of, here are what the program outcomes that we expect, and here's how we're going to price the ISA to fit that specific thing. That's very different than a lot of traditional education loans, which are not really looking at the specific outcomes of the program that the student is enrolled in, and simply, if anything, just looking at whether the program is accredited or not. Merit-based lending does this outcome-based underwriting, but it uses a traditional loan. So the student may not know that they're in kind of innovative finance, but they are the terms of the loan are dependent on the outcomes of the program that they're enrolled in. I'll quickly go to the stakeholder models.
Ethan, I'm sorry to interrupt. We're running short on time. We're due to end 15, in 3 minutes or so, and we have the plenary. So sorry to interject. I'm
so sorry.
We need to leave some time for Allison. So if you can.
Yes, I will skip to slide 5.
This one?
Yeah. Is that okay?
Yeah, if you can kind of quickly lay out this example, and then we'll turn to Allison. Thanks.
Sure. So one innovative finance approach that policymakers should really consider is lifelong learning accounts. And these are accounts that workers can use to pay for education and training programs offered by qualified providers. States would contribute a set amount of these accounts and match worker and employer contributions. And we recommend that states offer these accounts in a enhanced, culturally sensitive way that is incorporating career navigation services to really help workers make informed decisions about the way that they utilize these accounts. And I really apologize for dragging on. I will end there. Happy to take any questions.
No, yeah, great information. And there's a lot more to follow up on. And I'll just quickly note this as our recommendations related to innovative finance. But with the couple minutes that we have remaining, I definitely want to turn to Allison to bring us home on how to make our recovery inclusive.
Thanks, Dave. So I'm going to zoom through this. So going to cover some of the current challenges with our legacy systems. So when you think about traditional economic development, one of the biggest challenges that there's often too much of a focus on attracting outside companies into a region. Almost 80% of all economic development dollars are spent to do that attraction. So think, cities vying to get Amazon to put their headquarters in their location. And so that leaves not much investment in local entrepreneurs and small businesses. And we know that's where a lot of job creation happens. And then when you think about education and training, even the highest quality programs may not be sufficient if the goal is economic mobility, if the community just doesn't have enough good quality jobs there for students and workers to matriculate into. And so you have those challenges, and then the fact that those strategies are often not aligned, and they're not usually addressing the place-based conditions that do affect economic mobility, like residential segregation, social capital, transportation, and health. Go to the next slide, please. So, that all sounds like some challenges to deal with. So JFF, what we're really trying to do is cast this vision of, how do we go about this? So, we have this definition of what is needed is inclusive regional economic development, which is the creation of an equitable and resilient economy that everyone can contribute to and benefit from, no matter who you are or where you live. Next slide, please. So I'm actually going to jump to the next one because we have kind of a list, but I just want to leave everyone with a couple examples if you want to learn more. Some examples in California, Inland Economic Growth and Opportunity, which is IEGO. It's a collection of cross-sector partners that are really focused on creating more jobs for middle-skilled workers in Southern California. JFF is playing a role as a project manager and facilitator, trying to take a cluster-based approach to economic development, so investing in industries like logistics, which is present in the region, and trying to make it more sustainable environmentally and have more quality jobs. So that's one example I would look into. And then Fresno is doing a lot of innovative work with this effort called DRIVE, which is the development of a $4 billion investment plan in the region, where a number of stakeholders across education and workforce and economic development and community-based organizations came together and say, hey, this is what we need as a region to really close equity gaps and improve economic outcomes. And so we played a role in supporting the Fresno Business Council, write an investment plan for what would it take to upskill the workers in our region to meet some of these jobs. And so, yeah, I'll stop there because I know we're at time, but happy to answer any questions about these specific examples.
That's great, and thanks, Allison. And I knew we had quite the ambitious plan here to cover 3 awesome topics in 45 minutes, squeezed in between sessions. And I know the plenary is just about to start, and so we'll be losing some participants there. But I wanted to thank the 3 of you. Just note again that as we built the state policy roadmap, it was really cascading off of the great work that we do out in field and what we're learning on what's working, where the challenges are. And here are some examples, again, around the inclusive economic development area. And just would welcome attendees to download the roadmap, take a look at it at jff.org/state roadmap. We think it can be an excellent tool, not just to guide short-term recovery efforts, but really to set that long-term vision for building an economy that truly works for everyone. And look forward to following up. If you have any questions or thoughts for me or for our panelists, by no means, you shouldn't hesitate, and we'd welcome an opportunity to talk with you further. So we'll leave it there. I know that there's so much more that we could have talked about, but hopefully this just gives you a sense of some of the kind of emerging transformational strategies that we're pursuing at JFF and where we think policy can play a key role in setting the conditions for a more equitable recovery.